many people secretly make promises to themselves late at night. Promises whispered into the quiet darkness about waking up earlier, working harder, chasing dreams with courage, and becoming someone better. Yet, when morning arrives, those promises dissolve into comfort, routine, and familiar excuses, and this cycle repeats so often that it begins to feel permanent, almost like fate. And this is where our story begins, not with magic or heroism, but with an ordinary young man named Aaron who lived in a modest village bordered by rolling hills, winding dirt paths, and fields that changed color with the seasons, a place where life was simple, but effort was respected. And Aaron, a metal worker by trade, possessed hands strong enough to bend iron and a mind sharp enough to design tools of remarkable quality. Yet despite his obvious ability, he carried a quiet flaw that shaped his days far more than his talent ever did. Because Aaron delayed everything that mattered, telling himself that tomorrow would always be a better time to begin, and every morning he woke slowly as sunlight spilled through the window of his small home, lingering in bed longer than necessary, convincing himself that rest was deserved and urgency could wait. While outside the village stirred with motion as farmers walked to their fields, merchants opened their stalls, and children ran laughing through narrow paths, but Aaron remained still, sipping warm tea, staring at nothing in particular, dreaming not of effort, but of applause, admiration, and success without struggle. And though his workshop sat only a few steps away, filled with raw metal, unfinished tools, and orders that had been requested weeks earlier, he avoided the sound of the hammer, the heat of the forge, and the discipline of routine, preferring instead to imagine the person he could one day become, rather than doing the work required to become him. And in those imagined futures, he saw himself respected, wealthy, confident, and proud. Yet in the present he was stagnant, telling himself that motivation would arrive like a wave and carry him forward when the time was right, unaware that motivation rarely visits those who refuse to move first. And as days turned into weeks, the gap between his dreams and his reality widened. Villagers began to notice delays. Farmers complained quietly about broken tools that were never repaired. Guards waited longer than promised for equipment, and murmurs spread not because people doubted Aaron's skill, but because they doubted his reliability. And reliability, more than talent, is what holds communities together. And though Aaron heard these whispers, he dismissed them with nervous laughter, convincing himself that things would somehow work out, that pressure would eventually force him to act. But pressure alone does not create discipline. It only creates stress. And stress without action leads to regret. And one afternoon, his closest friend, a man named Lucas, who worked tirelessly in the fields from dawn until dusk, visited Aaron and spoke honestly, telling him that ability unused is a burden, not a gift, and that waiting for the perfect feeling is another way of choosing fear over growth. Words that lingered painfully in Aaron's mind long after Lucas left, because deep down, Aaron knew the truth. He knew that he was not lacking intelligence or strength, but courage, the courage to face discomfort daily, to start before feeling ready, to accept that progress often feels boring before it feels rewarding. Yet knowing this did not immediately change him, because habits built over years do not collapse in a single moment of awareness. And so Aaron continued drifting until the consequences of his delay became impossible to ignore when the village council confronted him with concern rather than anger, explaining that his unfinished work affected livelihoods, that trust once shaken is hard to rebuild, and that talent without action eventually becomes irrelevant. And that night, Aaron sat alone in his workshop surrounded by cold metal and unfinished pieces, feeling smaller than ever before, realizing for the first time that his greatest enemy was not lack of opportunity, but his own avoidance of effort. And it was during this low moment that an unexpected visitor arrived, an older craftsman named Elias, who had traveled many villages and seen countless lives unfold, a man whose hands were scarred from decades of work, and whose eyes held calm certainty rather than excitement. And Elias spoke gently but firmly, explaining that success is not born from inspiration but from obedience to routine, that discipline is not a personality trait but a skill forged through repetition, that waiting to feel motivated is like waiting for firewood to burn before lighting it, and that action must always come first, even when energy is low and doubt is loud. And he suggested something deceptively simple: to begin with minutes rather than hours, to commit not to excellence but to consistency, to show up daily regardless of mood, and to understand that identity changes after behavior, not before it. And though Aaron felt skeptical, something within him shifted, not hope, but responsibility. And the next morning, instead of waiting for the perfect feeling, he picked up the hammer, despite heavy limbs and a restless mind, working only briefly before stopping. Yet that brief effort broke a long-standing pattern, and the following day he returned again, not because it felt good, but because he had decided that effort would no longer be optional. And slowly his hands remembered their purpose, his focus sharpened, and his confidence began rebuilding, not from praise but from proof. Each completed task reinforcing a new self-image, someone who acts despite resistance, someone who finishes what he starts. And over time, the villagers noticed the change, not in grand gestures, but in consistency. Tools delivered when promised, progress visible day after day, and with each small success, Aaron felt a deeper satisfaction than any fantasy had ever provided, because earned pride lasts longer than imagined glory. And months passed. Momentum replaced hesitation, discipline replaced excuse, and the workshop that once symbolized avoidance became a place of purpose. And when Elias returned, he found not a transformed man, but a committed one, someone who understood that greatness is not a sudden leap, but a daily decision to endure effort without negotiation. And Aaron finally understood that laziness is not a fixed identity, but a temporary state reinforced by avoidance. And that action, even imperfect action, is the antidote. And the story of Aaron spread not because he became famous, but because he became dependable. A reminder to anyone who hears it that the life you want is built in moments when you would rather rest, that discipline outlasts motivation, that progress begins the moment you stop waiting to feel ready, and that the future version of yourself is created not by dreaming about change, but by choosing effort today, again and again, even when no one is watching.